and welcome back to J.P.'s World of Wrestling. It's been a while, but I'm back. I'm your man J.P., and today we're talking about something specific because, as you can tell, I've got my Wrestlemania t-shirt on. That's because today we're talking about Wrestlemania, and not just any Wrestlemania, a specific one, more specifically, the very first, numero uno, Wrestlemania. That's right. The year was 1985. The date was March 31st. The location was Madison Square Garden in New York City. And basically, Vince McMahon had put everything he had financially into this one event. And if it had failed, then chances are WWF would have folded. So Vince McMahon was banking everything on this one event. But luckily for us all, it was successful. And this thing was just huge, absolutely huge. I mean, it was so huge that the WWF had brought in like celebrities from Hollywood to be part of this event. You know, like Liberace, was part of the main event, and Cyndi Lauper, famous pop singer, was part of one of the matches at WrestleMania, and this thing was just enormous, you know. And it was so big that a lot of celebrities, were in the audience and they were backstage. And now this was before actual pay-per-view. So if you wanted to see this event, you had to either be there live, which was hard to do because the tickets were just they were a lot of money and there was only so many tickets available. I mean, this thing sold out like very quickly. Or you had to go to your local movie theater or sports venue and see this thing via short or closed circuit, which basically you'd watch it on the big screen. You'd pay a certain amount of money. You'd go in and watch this thing on the big screen. Because this is before you could watch things like this in the comfort of your own home. Because I think by this time, cable TV was still relatively new. I know it was a thing, but I'm not sure that pay-per-view was really a thing. At least not wrestling pay-per-views. Although maybe it was. I don't know. But anyway, this thing was just enormous. And so there were a lot of matches at this thing, and we'll get to the main event in just a little bit, but there was a tag team title match, and the U.S. Express, which was Barry Windham and his tag team partner and longtime friend Mike Rotunda. They were the U.S. Express. They were managed by Captain Lou Albano, and their opponents was this anti-American team consisting of Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik. In fact, yep, these two guys right here, Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik, managed by Classy Freddie Blassie. But their opponents were the U.S. Express, and so basically, the Iron Sheik, who had just come off of losing the WWF title to Hulk Hogan, the Hulkster, and so he was pretty upset. So he tagged up with Nikolai Volkov, and the both of them actually defeated the U.S. Express at WrestleMania 1. Now, Classy Freddie Blassie had something to do with it. He tossed in his cane, and this guy, the Iron Sheik, used the cane against, I believe it was Barry Windham, knocking him out, allowing Volkov to make the cover. What a dastardly thing to do from that conniving manager, Classy Freddie Blassie. That was a very non-classy thing to do, Freddie Blassie. Anyway, this was almost 40 years ago, so it doesn't matter. But it's still fun to think about. It's still fun to go back and think about these things. And another match that was of interest and that had kind of a story to it was the women's WWF title match. And this match was Wendy Richter, who was the challenger, and her temporary manager for this event was female pop star Cyndi Lauper. And the opponent, of course, was the champion Leilani Kai, who was managed by the former champion, the Fabulous Moolah. Now, pretty much all these characters, with the exception of Cyndi Lauper, was on the Hulk Hogan cartoon during that time frame, 85, 86, the Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling cartoon. But what had happened, I guess, was Wendy Richter had won the title from the Fabulous Moolah, and then Leilani Kai challenged for the title and won it due to interference from the Fabulous Moolah. So then Wendy Richter turned around and challenged Leilani Kai again at this big event coming up called Wrestlemania. And this time Cyndi Lauper was going to be there, and Cyndi Lauper was going to keep a close eye on Fabulous Moolah. Anyway, Wendy Richter ended up winning the title back from Leilani Kai at WrestleMania 1. And it was a big victory, and, and so before we get to the main event, I have to talk a little bit about, like, aesthetically, WrestleMania 1, when you go back and you look at it and watch it, it looks very dated. Just because of the lighting, it looked like a house show. Basically, they turned down all the lights except for the lights in the ring. And that was back when the ring bell still had that ding, 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 instead of the quick ding, ding, ding that we know today. So it was still ding, 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 and then it lingered on. So there was that. And plus, backstage, they had Lord Alfred Hayes standing with a microphone. He looked like really nervous. His hands were kind of shaking, and he didn't really do a very good job. He's like, "Oh, coming up next is a match with two mighty wrestlers. Let's hear pre-recorded comments that they had earlier in the show." And then he just kind of stood there, and it just didn't look very good. But it was their first time out. There were bound to be things like that kind of stand out. But yeah, I mean, there was an Intercontinental title match where Greg Valentine defended the title against the Junkyard Dog, and there were all kinds of matches. But now we come to the main event. So the story behind the main event was that Hulk Hogan had appeared on an episode of The A-Team, starring Mr. T as B.A. Baracus. And in turn, Mr. T was appearing on WWF shows. Now, Roddy Piper, he didn't care for that. He didn't like this actor coming in and invading the WWF. This actor thinking that he could just get in the ring and do what these wrestlers do. Piper didn't like that. So Piper would make a big fuss on the Piper's Pit, and he would make fun of Mr. T, and he would call Mr. T out saying, "Oh, you're not a real athlete like I am. You're just this actor. You don't know what you're doing." Then Mr. T would go off on Piper saying, "Hey man, I could beat you up anytime I want." And Hulk Hogan was there, and Hulk Hogan was kind of there to kind of keep the peace, because behind the scenes, from what I understand, Roddy Piper legitimately had heat with Mr. T. He did not like Mr. T at all. And it's because, like I said, Mr. T was there invading the WWF, thinking he could just get in the ring without any training. And when it came time to actually train for the match, Mr. T didn't want to train. I guess he didn't want to get in there and actually work out with Hogan and train for the match. So that added to the fire of, the heat that T had with Piper. And so Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, they tagged up. And of course they had the Ace, Cowboy Bob Orton, in their corner. And then Hulk Hogan and Mr. T tagged up. and they had Superfly Jimmy Snuka in their corner. And Hulk Hogan had just come off of winning the WWF title from the Iron Sheik the year before. So he was still, a fresh commodity. People were still very much on board with Hulkamania. And so, this match, it was won by Hulk Hogan and Mr. T. But from what I understand, Piper, he didn't even want to sell for T at all. He didn't want Mr. T to get any moves in at all. He didn't want to do anything. He wanted to make Mr. T look terrible. Like he wanted to humiliate him, legit. But Hulk Hogan was kind of there to say, Piper, come on, look, I understand how you feel, but we got to do business here. People are paying money for this ticket. It's a big event, and this is make or break for this company. So let's work a little. So Piper reluctantly agreed, even though he didn't let anybody beat him. So basically, Hulk Hogan ended up pinning Mr. Wonderful. Then Piper, basically punched Pat Patterson, the referee, and took a powder. And interesting thing about the match is that Muhammad Ali was actually the guest referee on the outside of the ring. And he actually took a swat at Piper a couple times. But anyway, Piper took a powder, left Mr. Wonderful in the middle of the ring after the match to deal with Piper and T, or Hulk Hogan and Mr. T, who were just there to make sure he was, are you okay, man? But anyway, Mr. Wonderful. That's when Mr. Wonderful kind of hinted at turning babyface, and then he would turn babyface for about a year. But anyway, that's another story. But anyway, yeah, WrestleMania 1 was successful, even though the camera looked dated and the lighting looked dated and everything looked very, very dated. But interesting enough was that this guy right here, Mean Gene Okerlund, actually sang the Star Spangled Banner to open up the show. So, very interesting thing there. And he actually did a pretty good job. I mean, you wouldn't think Mean Gene Okerlund would have this wonderful singing voice. And he wasn't like fantastic, he wasn't a professional singer, but he actually, considering that he wasn't a trained singer, he actually didn't do too bad. I actually was impressed for a non-trained singer. But anyway, that's kind of the story of WrestleMania 1. It was, I've seen it many times over, several times, and I actually kind of enjoy WrestleMania 1, even though it looks old and everything on it just looks old, but it was old. It was almost 40 years ago. So anyway, that's the story of WrestleMania. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this look back, this travel back in time, if you will, with me. And if you're new here, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.